I'll just record this little bit. So if you're on the screen, you want to click off, feel free. Okay. So archive, what it does for us is we look at the original information. What you did with the government one, you looked at and said, oh, what's there? What did they have to say? We just see the end result. We see the law, whatever your interest was, you might see law. But if it was the euthanasia one, you would have seen what the outcome is. That's what we see written in the law. We know what we do socially. But it's worth going back to see what went on before it. So in archive, you go back and say, what brought this about potentially is what the archive might do. Or you might look and review the data and say, wait a minute, the data's wrong. That was the egg issue. Eggs were in the 80s seen as bad for you, high cholesterol. They increase your cholesterol, bad negative cholesterol, which leads to heart complications. And then like 15 years ago, maybe 20, I don't know, 20 maybe, I think it was 15, they redid the research. They went to the original research and reviewed it and said, whoa, wait a minute, egg yolks do that. But egg yolk and egg white together don't do that. They don't have that impact. So what, this stuff in an egg yolk is bad for you, but the stuff in the egg white is good for you. And between the two of them, they work out. So we've redone it. They went back to the archive and said, oh, there was something they missed, it was wrong. By being able to go to the original archive, they could test it and see that it's wrong or right. So archival is cheaper. It's time consuming because you saw that with the government ones, right? It is time consuming, but it is cheaper to run because it's just you dig through the material. Secondhand information, you reanalyze the original stuff. You try not to go with my opinion on it. You try to go find the original data, which is what I did with the music stuff. What's interesting with the music, what I've only recently learned is that whole Michael Jackson, Elvis, and you look at sort of that history piece that I put on the online as that review. That is blues music that we know of and that I talked about there. I've only just discovered that blues music actually comes from the Tuareg people in Northeast Africa. They've been playing a stringed instrument, playing what we would see as old blues for a lot longer than 100 years. It came with, I'm going to guess it came through slavery. It came with the peoples that came from that part of the world to eventually land in now what is North America. And their music came with them. Music as an archive is incredible, I think. The story that's in music, if you listen to music for the language, it's huge. I think in that video, did I talk about 50 Cent? That notion of what he did out of Compton, the Compton bunch, what they did with rap, early rap is all politicized music. It's about saying, this is not right. So is old blues. I think I gave you a link to Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson is an entertainer from the 30s and 40s. Singer, actor, brilliant man, sociologist, I guess you'd say, and a public speaker. And he talked about socialism. So he was outlawed or banned to some degree in the US because of his socialist views, sounds communist. What he was talking about is equality. He was talking about what Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about. Martin Luther King Jr. was influenced by the speeches of Paul Robeson 20 years earlier. It's not new, it's continued and adjusted. And we shouldn't forget, because that's the part of saying, well, we could almost dismiss, if you only look from Martin Luther King Jr. forward and say, well, this is when it's really bad and the problem between a polar or a bipolar nation split on color lines, the US. If you look at that and only go back that far, you say, well, shit, that was big. If you look back, if you follow the history, you say, no, this is 400 years of this. This has gone on from the beginning. That's what the archive does for us. And that's what following that archaeological mindset of what came before, what's in there. again, be careful what you read. If you read articles or material written by the empowered white population in England, even the more libertarian views who are saying, slavery, abolitionists, some of them have some interesting writing and insight. Abraham Lincoln did not, the Civil War didn't start over slavery. Don't think that started because that's the thing we attached to it that was such a significant piece of it. But it did not start over, well, we should free our brothers and sisters who are in chains. Side issue was politics. It was about whether this bunch of states unites or doesn't. I find that's brutal to me. Because I grew up thinking Abraham Lincoln, whoa, now I still think what he did was important, but it's not quite the awe that I had for it because he adopted it later on. It's part of what he did. We should all be equal. I gave you another lecture to look at that is worth, it's interesting. I'm pretty sure I posted it for you. That gives you this strong sense of who we are and who we aren't. So it's in it, he gets right to it. If you actually watch it, you will see who are the two? I'm trying to think of the secondary debater in it. It's a debate from 1961. But essentially it is this kind of James Baldwin debate. Oh, William F. Buckley is who he debates with. It's a 1-hour debate. James Baldwin debate William F. Buckley. So they're talking about, and James Baldwin in 1965 gives us this wonderfully articulate description of the evil of a bipolar or bipartisan, if you want, whatever term you want to put for it, a split nation, split on color. So James Baldwin says, consider this, and it's one clip that I think is valuable, but here's what goes in it. And this is a brilliant man who's thought about history and put it together. And he said, so he's talking in 65, a couple of years before that. Have any of you heard of John F. Kennedy? Big celebrated president of the United States, right? His dad was organized crime. In the 30s, they were moving moonshine, Irish moving moonshine. He becomes, they become wealthy. They get rid of the abolition on alcohol. Now they're a big corporation and now they're legitimate. And he becomes the president. He says, and think about the audacity of this, and that's what Baldwin gets to, but he puts it in wonderful and eloquent terms. He says, one day, maybe in 50 years, we'll see a black man. He didn't say black woman, but he says, maybe in 50 years, we'll see a black man in my chair as the president of the United States. And that is seen as this great forward-thinking place, right? Great forward-looking place by John F. Kennedy. And James Baldwin says, you've been here for 50 years, not even 50 years. You're an infant. We've been here for 400 years on the receiving end of this. How dare you say maybe in 50 years, one of us might be able to sit in that chair? It's like, so that's my take on it, because I find it particularly offensive, the way it's said. But when I heard it, I thought, initially, the same thing. I'm like every other person out there who hears us. Wow, isn't that nice? Like he's actually thinking about inclusivity. When I heard about it as a young kid, it's that, wow, so that no wonder he died, because of course they would hate him because of racism. And now I look and say, what's the politics behind it in the archives? And that statement is absolutely offside. So what I see in that is John F. Kennedy saying, we are so ignorant and so evil-spirited as a nation that we are still at this place where maybe in 50 years, those who've lived with us from the very beginning of of our nation, before we were a nation, from the very beginning of us being here as Europeans, that we think they're not really ready to sit at the table with us. They're not really up to sitting at the big adult table. Think about adult child tables. I find it terribly offensive to consider that. Unless Kennedy is potentially saying we are so ignorant and stupid. I'm not sure that he was, though. So here's the list of different things that could count, and I'm going to bump through all of these that could count as archives. So border stops, back to the that thought of confidentiality. If you want to find out citizenship, you can find out how many people come to Canada. Can you find out who leaves? Here's the big issue comes out of archives. One, is there a record? That's the first question you ask yourself. Is there a record? And then the second question is, can you get access? So border stops. Anybody gone down to the US, driven across the border?
Yes.
Who checks your passport?
The border service agent.
Which side?
Both.
When you're going. When you're leaving Canada, do they stop you and you got to show them your passport?
No,
Yeah.
when you get to the other side.
No, I think they
When you
they
go to
ask
the
you
other
both
side.
ways because they want to see identification.
No,
Coming
it's always
back,
the place you're
right?
going into.
Yeah, it's
isn't it?
the United States.
Checks your plate. They check who you are. When you come back to Canada, we check who you are. Do we have any idea you left? Nope. There's an archive. The US have a record of you coming in. So our government have worked out negotiations so our CBSA people could call over and find out, I guess. So they share information back and forth. But on the face of it, there is no archive to say you left Canada. And if you go out west, there's places where you drive over the border and there's a little sign that says, welcome to the United States. So we only capture data on who enters Canada. We don't know if you left. How about if you came and stayed? Would anybody know that you didn't leave? You show up, my family comes in, so they drive in. They take a bus. They don't fly because flying is harder because flying, you fly in, you fly out. So but they come in, and flying, we've got records in and out because that becomes, so if you fly, they check your passport before you get in a plane. That's not about Canadian government wants to know you're leaving. That's the airline making sure when they get there, and if they don't let you in, the airline doesn't have to fly you back. That's about the safety of the airlines. That's the airline business. That's not Canadian government worrying about your leaving. So that's why we can check into an airline online. You don't check in with CBSA when you go to the airport to go on the plane. You check in online. It's the airline being able to say, oh yeah, you're clear. We won't get stuck bringing you home. It's a financial issue. So again, when you look at process, you start to look at where's it come from? Why is it there? So they can tell residency. So my family comes on a bus, they come, they stay with me. They've got a permit to be here for 6 months and they don't leave. And somebody from CBSA comes in 6 years and says, is your family still here? What do you mean are they still here? No, they left, right? They're all hiding in the basement, but I'm gonna say they left because who's checking? Nobody's checking to see if you left. Eventually they will. Eventually CBSA gets onto that. Maybe not. We had a lot of people lived here illegal for a very long time. They say the population in the GTA of people living here that have overstayed is maybe like, they think somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 million people. I'm going to bet most of them are working. Most of them are probably contributing to society. I say keep them. Woohoo! You got people who are working. Good. Come here. We're going to give you some citizenship and stay. Thank you. Right? The people we want, but we won't. That's not how the rules work. So that visitor thing, we don't know. They don't know if you've left. They've got to come and investigate to try and find out. Airline tickets make it easier. Tax returns. Can you find out? Will CRA tell you anything about anybody else's taxes? Nope. But there is an archive. because they have a record of everybody who's been paying taxes forever. It's not, so it's there. There is an archive. We have no access to it. Now, if I wanted to draw out and go and ask for aggregate data, I might say, I'd like to do research on income levels in Canada. May I have access to, and they might say, well, what do you need? And I would say, I'd like to have access in this way. And they will determine if it's free to give it up to me in aggregate data, so I could do my research. So they are there. That's where I say, is there, so there's no archive of leaving Canada. And here there's an archive of taxes, but you can't get it. Parish records are interesting, church records, because churches in Europe, they are like what government is today. So you might have been Muslim, Hindu, Jewish. Your birth and death records might well be in churches. A parish is a local area that you could get to. Now we think about that, and in some of the, I think the islands, I think some of Africa, with friends there, I think still use the term parish. So a parish is a geographic area that's connected with a particular church. And way back in Europe, that parish would have been where you could get to go to church to pray, because you're supposed to pray in congregation in Christianity. So supposed to go and pray together. And the parish is the area that you can get to on your goat or walking within a day and get home before dark, because it's not safe to travel the roads at night. So the parish is so many miles distant, so far down the traveled route to get to or from. That's a parish. And they would keep records of all the births and deaths. And here's where we don't think of church as government, but in Europe, it was. For the first 1800 years, the church and state were tied. The church keeps records of birth and death. Does the government want those? Does the king want to know how many young boys they have? Because those young boys are going to be labor one day, and that means they're going to make money, and that means we get to collect taxes. Back to the CRA. Do they want to know who's born and dies? Yep, because it's about tax collection. How do we get something from these people to contribute to the whole of the community? Taxes have gone on forever, right? The Jesus story starts with taxes. They're on the way to Bethlehem. Why? Because the king said, everybody back to your home village, so we can do a census. We can find out who you are, and where you're making money. That's what it's about. That was that key in that. Underneath it, a lot of history has got somebody collecting from have-nots. Organizational minutes count, their archives. Public ones, we can get it. Private companies, we can't. You can't get records from, you can't get access to, I think Johnson & Johnson is a privately owned company since 1948. If they decided to add a little bit of cocaine into Colgate to make it so you come back for more, we wouldn't know. They're not going to do that. But we wouldn't know because they're a private organization. Unless somebody decides they're going to tell us, we don't know anything what's going on in their business model. If it's a public organization, so they sell it shares on the stock market, now you have access to the decision making. You just need to buy a share. Shell Oil was going to do drilling in the Arctic. I know what that was, 5-6 years ago, something like that. And when they got there ready to go, there was a couple of Greenpeacers sitting in lawn chairs with really cold beers saying, the world's watching and we're not moving. We're going to move out of the way. We're going to drill. Well, nope, we're not moving and you can't move us. And they sat and they had a blockade that prevented Shell from, I'm pretty sure it was Shell, I think it was Shell, that prevented them from drilling in the Arctic. Because the activists were there first. Normally the activists show up later and they drive around with their ships and they try to interfere with oil rigs and get them to be annoying and they go away. This one, they got there ahead of time. And I'm betting that what they did is they realized if you buy one share in every oil company for $75 a share, you know what Shell is going to do because now you're an owner. You get to go to the meetings. You get to hear Shell saying, we're going to do research and development in the Arctic. So Greenpeace shows up. They own their one share in Shell. They go to their shareholder meeting. They get told that's what's going to happen. They say, let's get there first. And they're there waiting when Shell showed up. access. So there is an archive, there is a process going on we can look at. How do we get access? Oh, if we buy a share, we get access. Court records, you can't find out if I'm a criminal. If I got a criminal background, you can't find out. Any of you done a public, one of those security checks for work? You got to do the
Yeah.
vulnerable sector. Yeah. What is that? That says you're good to be hired, right? You're safe to be hired?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just
No.
allows them to know that you don't have a criminal record.
Right. Does that mean you're safe to be hired? Or does it mean you never got caught?
Just
That you
means
never got caught.
Yeah. Look at the meaning we put to that archive. Because if you go, as long as you show up with it, they say, oh, you're safe. No, you are not. Absolutely not. Working with children, that document to me, if I was hiring, means nothing to me. Nothing. It means you didn't get caught. You might be very good at what you do. So, something to consider. So you can't find out about court records unless I give you access to my record. Interesting, the government is who keeps that record. The easiest place to get access is through the police, which is government. But the police say, no, no, we're not going to give you the record unless the person tells you. If you go to the courtroom when I get convicted and you see that, you can know that I'm convicted. If you know what court I had a trial in, you can go to that court and say, he had a trial and I want to know if his records are there. And they will look up the record for me and say convicted, not guilty, whatever. They will tell you what's going on. It's in the court records and you can get it. You just don't know what court to go to. So it's a strange one because the court record is public and you're allowed to have access. The easiest way to get access is the police, but the police won't give it up. And they're both government. And this part of government says you're allowed to have it, and this government says, yeah, we ain't giving it to you. So it was those laws around that security were written in the 20s when everything was local. People knew each other. You go to the village courthouse. Now it's changed. So that's court records is an interesting archive. It's there. You're allowed to have access, but physically you might not be able to get it. You just don't know where to go look. Parliamentary minutes we've already done. You played with those. Aggregate we talked about already. That idea of what's in ethics and confidentiality. This one. Private records are less accessible. The Diary of Anne Frank is an interesting archive, I would say. It's also could be seen as a case study. The Diary of Anne Frank is the story of a young girl hiding, Jewish girl in hiding. The Nazi machine is rolling through Europe and coming their way. She doesn't know what's coming. They don't know when she's writing that book about the camps. They don't know that they're going to die. She knows something really bad is coming and it's scary. They just don't know what it is. We know about the Holocaust afterwards. We now understand what it is. The archive tells us. We didn't know before that. So her book became an archive because it tells us the story. And here's how it's useful as a case study, that archive. It's written in the 40s. Some could dismiss this and say, this is World War II. It's European problem. It happened then. It's a long time ago. We're better now. We know better. Do you think there are young teenage girls that are living a similar existence today in the world? Thinking about fear of what might be coming their way, fear of what might happen?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that archive gives us exposure and that case study, but it's an archive that the actual data. And when I say data, that just means the information you got. If you do an interview, the words that I tell you in your interview are data. So the data you got, you can use as a case study to say, wow, this is a horrible existence. So your college transcripts, I can't get your grades. Only in my course. I'm not allowed to know what your grades are in other courses. Hospital records, can't get those. You have to pay if you want them to. They're your records. You have to pay because hospitals, and here's what you learn. Hospitals aren't government. They're private. They bill the government pays the bill, but they're private. So you want your ultrasound you had, good, $20, they'll give you the CD. So that notion of, is it there? Can you get access? If you can, what's involved with getting access? So we did this piece, the ethics and confidentiality. Mass media. Newspapers are not on the face of it an archive because you can't actually know that they're the truth of what happened. They're influenced by the fact that they're a business. Are they telling us the facts in the story, or are they giving us their take on it? If you watch CNN and Al Jazeera, you watch some international incident, watch Al Jazeera and watch CNN, and you'll see two very different takes on the very same incident by what are seen as mass media. Different interpretation, different views. So be careful with it. They might give you an indication as an archive what was topical at the time. So what was topical in the 50s and the 60s, you could look and see what goes on, what the notion of, so the portrayal of women, subordinate positions. If you look at the television, look at the movies, there's a old black and white TV show, Leave It to Beaver. That was seen as what's supposed to be the epitome of the American family. Mother, father, two children, which happen to be boys, oddly enough, the troubles the boys get into, the family dynamics, living in town, all that stuff. So that exposes maybe some sense of socially what's acceptable to produce. What's acceptable now on YouTube was illegal. The sexualized stuff that is all just social media and YouTube was illegal. It was seen as pornography. You get arrested, go to jail for possession of it. In the 80s, into the 90s, it started to change. So it would give you a sense of so you're not reading it for the truth of what it says. You're reading it to say what could they talk about? How was it maybe discussed? That might be useful as a archive, but there's selective editing goes with it. The textbook you read, be careful, that is not an archive, that's somebody's opinion. It's their opinion on research. My slides are my opinion on research, that's all it is. Let them run, ignore those. Our books, if it says Canadian textbook, look and see is the author from Canada. If they're American and they write they add in some examples from Canada, they can now say it's the Canadian edition. Be careful. Canadian and American, is there some strong similarities in our cultures? Maybe, yeah, we all have McDonald's, right? Every corner. Are there some big differences, American to Canadian culture?
Yes.
I would say they're huge. We don't have a gun culture. We're not shooting each other up all the time, right? We're not, oh, I'm scared of you, you're scared of me, we both have a gun, oh, gunfight. We're not doing that stuff. So we tend to be more accepting of our government. We have faith in our government to sort of guide and try, as a guidance or a leader for us. Down there, it's like they grew out of revolution. Government is, no, government's bad, government's problem. So they're in a revolutionary constant struggle mindset. Ours is about, no, thank goodness. The first people to go west in Canada were the Mounties. And then the people went behind them. Law went first. Representatives of the crown. And then people behind the crown. We fell in behind. We felt safe to fall in behind. Down there, it was like Wild West, and then government tried to push itself on top later. Big fight for government to establish itself as government. So some other ones quickly. Songs I did in that other video, right? You look at what song looks like, national character. Think about even that, our symbols. A symbol in Canada, Mounties, an RCMP they're on the coin. We have a police officer as a national symbol in Canada. Think about that. Do you think there's any other country in the world that sees law and order or the police as a national symbol? Because police in Canada are supposed to represent fairness, justice, doing it right, doing it better, maybe. Some would argue that right now, but that's the idea. What's in language? Who knows, right? The Beatles, anybody know the Beatles? Or is that too old? So the Beatles, their songs were like, right, all about love and stuff. What made it okay to write about that stuff? What made it okay to write the stuff they did when they did? Something socially allowed it. If you listen to the words in the Beatles, you listen to the stuff, rock and roll before that. And when I say rock and roll, that video, right? Rock and roll is not Elvis. Rock and roll, Chuck Berry, Little Richard. You look at rock and roll music when it started to roll, and then you look at what the words are in the song, and you can go back to the 30s and look at the songs and say, and when you look at the words, it's not unlike rap music that is just straight and hardcore, right? Birthday sex, there's a song for you. And then, but then they wrote about the same stuff, but they wrote it in more subtle ways. It was written sort of tucked in the lane. They're talking about the same stuff. They're talking about the same stuff in some songs. It's not like sex was not in any old songs. It was written in a pleasant, lovey song kind of thing, but yeah, hidden a little bit. Polite society. So verbal histories, the folklore. I did that a little bit earlier, the idea of indigenous peoples. There is no written record. The written record is verbal. The archive is verbal history. We're starting to write it now. The demand to write stuff now. So graffiti could count as an archive. Where does it land? Why does it land? Where was it? How did it land? This Broken Windows was a book written by Malcolm Gladwell. Or no, it's not by Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote about it in The Tipping Point. But Broken Windows is New York is a mess. Lots of crime. It's kind of dirty. People traveling there. They decide to clean it up. They start with cleaning up every little broken window, every little bit of graffiti got painted over. Here we are, that's way back when, 70s, 80s, they go to this graffiti thing and they clean everything up. So in the 80s, New York gets cleaned up. And now what was seen as graffiti, destructive spray painting on buildings and stuff and trains and stuff is now seen as artwork. And now we get the same person that would have got arrested 20 years to come and paint the police station because it's art. We recognize it as art instead of just destructive graffiti, garbage, not garbage, but destructive. So that notion of what changed socially to allow what now we may see as wall art as positive thing rather than, what's that, Nuit Blanche? Right, you walk around there, you see all that stuff that's done. It's people street art. That would have been illegal a few decades ago. Clothing, right? Everybody's wearing all unique, special clothing that all has the same tag on it, though. Hat on, locked. Tag. When I watch stuff that moved, the tag hanging on the hat. You've got the tag still. You leave the tag in your hat. The name of your purse, the name of your pants. The boots you wear, all of those things show some sense of socially what was going on. What's interesting is they roll back around about 40 years, they roll back around. They seem to do this cycle stuff. Internet, how that's changed things. Chat rooms, blogs, news groups, you're not doing that the same anymore, right? It's social media. This was early social media. How did it come about to be where we are? It started up with people saying it's kind of like going to a coffee shop. Significant archive. What's in there? What do the paintings mean? 3 generations back to your grandparents, great-grandparents. Hitler tried to do it going through Europe. If you burn their history, in 3 generations, there will be none of those people. There's nothing to remember what went before. Your great-great-grandparents, you don't know anything about. So if they wipe out your culture today, all of your artifacts, your history, your language, colonization, if we strip you of your language, your identity, and all of the things that mark it and show it and symbolize what it was, 3 generations, it won't be. We may not even know the name of it. So these ones I can go through pretty quick. This is what it does for us, how archival works well for us. We get to see what we can't know. Bear in mind how it's written and who it's written by, but we get to consider what it was, what was going on in history. It will allow us, like the newspaper stuff, it'll show us social change. It lets us look at what's going on today socially, what was going on 20 years, 50 years, maybe 100 years ago, and say, whoa, women, that whole suffragette movement where we watched women rise up and say, no way, you're not doing this anymore. We get to vote. That notion of social change that comes out, we get to see that out of the archive. We can only guess at it without it being written. So we tie it with different ideas, maybe a frame of reference for us. So if we look at patriarchy in today's society and universities, say, then you look and say, how does that fit with what it used to be? Women weren't allowed to teach, women weren't allowed to be doctors. So how did we get to where we are? What's the frame of reference today that says everybody can do everything where before not allowed? So it sort of lets us wrap it together. I think like an archaeological dig, I think it's a good idea. I think it's useful. You may not report all on it, but it gets you thinking about not just in this one little space, it opens your mind. So cross-cultural, I can do research on a topic here. I could have somebody in Russia, somebody in China, somebody in India, someone in Costa Rica. We could all do similar research on a similar topic, share our results. One person could do the research. We could all talk about it and have influence. That's the beauty of archive. We can all look at it through different lenses at the same time. It's cheaper to do. Might give me a bigger sample size. If I want to look at seniors, geriatric health, what they get fed, how they get fed in seniors homes, or what we're doing with the virus pandemic stuff, what goes on with that. I might get from the archive, I can go look up medical records and see what it looks like, get more out of it. So it's cheaper just by virtue of that. I may be able to do the control effect, the experimental design. I might be able to say, here's what existed. What do I need to ask about? What's missing in this? So in the reanalysis, I start to see what was going on where the researchers actually controlled things. If I look at Milgram, the archive, the actual Milgram experiment I can watch, and I say, whoa, what's the bias in that? Who were the people Milgram grabbed? He got people walking by the street to come in and join in his experiment. Who got left out? Was that a predominantly white male middle class or working class group that he got to come in from that particular shop that he opened up? Who did he get women? Did he not enough women? Did he get people of color? Did he get people of higher socioeconomic status, lower? I get to see all that when I look at his archive and say, ooh, I'm not as sold on it as I thought I was, right? Reviewing the John F. Kennedy debate or his speech, his inaugural speech, says, not as thrilled as I was. When you look at what's going on in the US, all of the monuments that are getting taken down. Christopher Columbus, they've been talking about for at least a decade, taking that down. Because the archive, what they did with him. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Think about that one though. Locating data, I can go get it. So what's there? Can I get access to it? Often I will use a hypothesis when I'm doing archival research. I'm going to go in and look and see what's there, but I probably will come up with an idea and write one. Not always necessary though. If the data is there in the archive and I can get access to it, it gives me good quant work because there's lots of it. If you do the parliament debates that you did, that each of you do, if you went digging through all of those, you get to say over this length of time, this many comments made on the floor in the House of Parliament, lots of data coming in from lots of sources. It lets you do a nice quantitative analysis. Privacy comes in as this big key of in archival is you've got to ask them for permission. So what will they give you? What won't they give you? That meets. The other is you may have to give in to their demands in order to get access. That may just be the price you have to pay. Representativeness, which comes out of quantitative, but as well qualitative, says, how are we going to deal with this? How do we say that the data we got is representative of what was going on socially? Because I got it from this many sources, I got this much data from each source. We lay all that out with an archival research project. We get to maybe rewrite because we get to look at the people whose voice wasn't heard. Sometimes the data can be wrong, even if it's from a good place, and this is understanding methods. So Addiction Research Foundation, highly recognized research facility in Ontario, dealing with important issues, right? Addictions. They did a research study on drug use and dropouts in high school. So I interview all of you to find out what's the correlation between drug use and dropout. Anybody see an issue with that? You're here. You didn't drop out, you're still here. If I want to find out about the correlation between using drugs and dropping out, I need to talk to people who dropped out. Not you to tell me that, well, my friend dropped out, I think he was using drugs. How do you know? Right? My data may not be very valid. This was I think, a faulty research project. Because I look at the method and say, we can guess that it probably impacts, but they might have put too much weight on it. So then you get to, is it reliable and valid? Did it come from a good source, a source close enough to be acceptable? Was it valid? Am I going to put some weight to it, hang my hat on it? Here's the last piece I want you to think about, archives. And here's the flaw in archives. So the story of Christopher Columbus, that got written by Europeans who were all celebrating Christopher Columbus who got here. In the archives, somebody got looking at those archives and realized somewhere in that archive, and this is the beginning of saying we need to take down his statue, get rid of Columbus Day, because in the archive, they realized Columbus has the manifest. The manifest says, here's what's on the ship. 1 captain, a cabin boy, 12 sailors, a cook, a couple of people for mops, whatever everybody's jobs is. There's 16 barrels of guns, there's 4 cannons, there's, well, they didn't have corn, the corn they got when they were here, but there's potatoes, there's some meat. So it says that, and then there's 6 males and 2 females and 1 child. And that's on the manifest. Beside all of the stuff you've listed, not as workers, but the stuff you've listed as assets on the ship that you're taking over with you. Somebody looked at that and said, what does this mean? And said, this is slaves. These are people in chains. He had 6 males, not 6 sailors, 6 males who are going to be the free labor when we get here. Christopher Columbus is a slaver. He's the first asshole to get to America. Because he brought people who didn't want to come, and he brought them in chains. The archives are what showed us that. Otherwise, we'd still be saying, oh, Christopher Columbus, he founded the New World. No. I say Christopher Columbus, my view is the evil. Yeah, everybody was, and they can say, that's what everybody was doing. Oh, that makes it okay? So this is a problem for me. The archive is what exposes it to us. Consider this, and I think, so South Africa is interesting. Nelson Mandela, you've all heard of Nelson Mandela? Yeah. I was old enough to watch that breakup of South Africa. The violence, I saw some. I only saw what was shown in the West on the news. But I understood that he was in jail for 20 years as a criminal. He was writing letters. Those letters got out to the world, and the world started saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right. What's interesting in those archives, so he gets out. If you've been in jail, imagine you go into jail now or a couple of years from now, and you're in jail for 20 years. You come out in your 40s. And all you tried to do was make the world a better place. Do you think you might come out a bit angry? So I watched, hearing what went on in South Africa, and I thought when he comes out, I thought, oh, they're going to get it now. I figured everybody white in South Africa would leave or flee the country or get thrown out because they're going to have an open election. He wins. All of that history, hundreds of years of evil history, it's coming your way now. A little small minority group doing this. What's interesting, and here's what the archive is, I find really interesting. And his archive says, he talks about when he's in jail about this is not the way to treat people. We should be equal. We should treat each other better. Well, he's in jail. So it could easily be dismissed as the writings of a guy who's in jail who's saying, shit, this isn't very good. I'm not happy with my life. It could have been dismissed. It didn't get dismissed. It got listened to. When he came out and got empowered, and I think this is some of the key that makes Mandela such a significant person. But then I'm going to suggest if you look at Mandela, you should look at the other Mandela. Because Winnie Mandela, many say, look differently. So let me finish with Nelson Mandela first. He comes out, he gets elected, he's 20 years in jail. He comes out and says, you did some terrible things to me, to my people. We're now in charge. We have the majority, right? We're in charge of government. And he says, if you apologize, we'll let you stay. You just have to apologize. So for hundreds of years, we couldn't come into the room with you. We couldn't ride on the bus. We couldn't use your bathroom. If you will apologize, we'll let you sit at the table with us. You're still welcome here. What a beautiful space, headspace to be in. That's what Nelson Mandela brings to the world. And he stayed true to it. He followed from, but what's interesting if you listen to Winnie Mandela, who says, we're going to kick your ass out. You've been doing this forever and we're taking over the country. No, it's not okay. And no, we're not apologetic. So she was a very unapologetic woman. I think wonderful spirit. And people now, friends, and I've been to Africa, well, a little part of Africa, but I've been to a couple of spots and friends there and people I met who say Winnie Mandela is who they celebrate. Because Winnie said, we're going to change this. We are going to, as a race, a Black race, African race, as a group of people, we're going to change this and make it better for all of us because you have been doing it, pushing us down forever, holding our head underwater. So beautiful spot. And I think to some, I kind of see where leaning towards her style says maybe right, because what we know today is in 1972, I think it was, or 1970, 95% of the economic wealth in South Africa is controlled by the minority white population. 2015, 95% of the economic wealth in South Africa is still controlled by the minority white population. So yeah, you can ride the bus, yeah, you can own property, yeah, you can do all that. Still controlled economically by the same small minority group. Winnie Mandela might have been on the right track as get out. So the other that I think is interesting with this, because Nelson Mandela does capture some of the thoughts of Martin Luther King Jr. 20, 30 years earlier. And Martin Luther King Jr. is also, if you read it's a short little letter from a Birmingham jail. It is such an inspirational piece. That article he writes, he's in jail for civil rights movement. He's in jail for trying to make the world a better place for everybody. But he speaks to the point of from the underclass, but it really would make the world for everybody. He writes it and he says, this is not the way we treat each other. Now, again, it's written from a person in jail. So of course he's writing about he doesn't like the way he's being treated. The beauty of it, when Martin Luther King Jr. is empowered, he's got millions of people standing behind him. His message didn't change either. Both of them stayed true to their same message of the way to a better world is holding hands, coming together. That archive only exists. Nelson Mandela is important and will be important because his letters are written, captured. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letters are captured. Paul Robeson's materials are captured. They aren't just spoken and float off. They're there as an archive for us. If the world gets better, if that Black Lives Matter stuff and systemic racism of the West, of the US and Canada, if that stuff gets better, it's going to hang on the hat of the things that were written by these people that we have in archive. So archive is a potentially beautiful historical place. If we think about how it's interpreted, I think that's where we get the meaning. These other slides, don't worry about. They're just some different sources you can go to. They don't matter. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about